Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Daniel Chofi. I'm the Architectural League of New York's Development and Membership Manager. I'm very glad to welcome you to the second Spotlight event this season for our Independent Projects Grant Program. So I'm going to take a few minutes to just introduce the program, and then I'll introduce the presenters for our event today. I'm sure many of you in the audience are already familiar with this. Independent Projects is a competitive grant program that is open to New York State residents in any of the design fields. It's currently offered as a partnership between the New York State Council on the Arts and the Architectural League of New York. And this year it is supporting 25 proposals for creative and research projects with grants of $10,000 each. This is a kind of fortuitous timing for this event because the 2024 application cycle is currently in progress. And I hope that many of you attending today are considering submitting a proposal for that. As I said, we welcome proposals in any design discipline, so it's not limited to architecture or landscape architecture. We welcome proposals in fashion, graphic, industrial, interior design, biodesign, interdisciplinary proposals as well. You can learn more about the application cycle for this year and find the program guidelines on our website at archleague.org/ipgrants24. The link to that is in the chat right now. So I definitely invite you to apply. Independent Projects seeks to support proposals that are attempting to answer the question, where can design go next? It's made possible with the support of the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature. We're very excited to be continuing this partnership directly with NYSCA. The League and NYSCA do not ourselves select proposals for funding. Instead, we convene a panel of design experts from across the state, from across different disciplines, who will be responsible for selecting proposals for funding. So if you'd like to learn more, we definitely welcome your proposal this year. Please check out our website for more information, full guidelines, and instructions on the application process. I'm also available to answer questions if you have any as you're considering a proposal. You can reach me at my email address, chofi@archleague.org. That's CIOFFI@archleague.org. I'm also happy to have phone calls by appointment if you would like to discuss a project or eligibility before you start a proposal. And the deadline for all applications this year is Wednesday, May 22nd. That's a firm deadline. So please be sure to check out those guidelines, formulate your proposal, reach out to me if you have any questions, and we look forward to seeing the applications that we received this year. With that, I'm going to introduce our program today. This is the second Spotlight event. We're very excited to be able to share the work that's been made possible through this grant program. So I'm going to ask our presenters to just turn on your video for a second. I'll make some quick introductions here. So the first project that we have presenting is BlueBlock Reef Garden. This is a project from the 2022 to 2023 application cycle. The presenters today, Elliott, Maltby, and Gita, Nandan. The design of the BlueBlock Reef Garden is conceived to mimic an integrated ecological system that supports life along a deep sectional column from the seafloor to the sun's rays in a closed-loop microcosm. Elliott, Maltby, and Gita, Nandan explored several interconnected material aspects, from kelp farming to the byproduct of kelp-crete, and the biophilic nature of seaborne infrastructure. Education and community interaction were key outreach aspects to engage a wider audience around restoration and the future of New York City's harbor. Elliott Maltby is a landscape architect, in her own words, deeply committed to public space with a particular focus on the intersection of social and ecological conditions. She is the co-founder of the design firm Thread Collective. Her professional work includes the first farm on public housing property in New York City. And Gita Nandan is an architect, urban designer, and educator focused on community resilience, planning, and design. She is co-founder and principal of the design firm Thread Collective, founder of Ready Center, and adjunct associate professor at Pratt Institute Graduate Center for Planning and Environment and the School of Visual Arts. And then our second set of presentation today will be harnessing sound from knit textiles, which is a proposal from the 2023 to 24 cycle. So it's currently in progress right now. This is a project by Melissa Conroy and Anthony Dicembre. An exploration at the crossroads of textile design, music, and sensory experience. This project will develop a collection of knit textile instruments that harness sound, offering new responsive performance and sound modulation opportunities for artists, including collaborator Mi A. Koi. Textile designer Melissa Conroy and musician Anthony Dicembre will create and test a variety of musical instruments for responsiveness and user experience to zero in on the most versatile and responsive soft instruments. Our presenters today for that project are Melissa Conroy and Mi-A Koi. Melissa Conroy is an interdisciplinary artist, educator, and textile designer. She is a senior lecturer in the Department of Human-Centered Design at Cornell University, where she specializes in service design and knit structure and design. Conroy's work has been exhibited in galleries and museums across America and in Europe. And Mi-A Koi is a Butoh-inspired dancer, choreographer, and video artist. She has performed globally in theaters, festivals, clubs, and museums, including The Kitchen and Theater for a New City. Currently located in Ithaca, New York, Koi collaborates with a wide variety of artists and produces performances and videos featuring local dancers and guest artists. So first up, we're going to have our presentation by BlueBlock Reef Garden, Elliott, Maltby, and Gita, Nandan. And as we're watching these presentations, I definitely encourage all of you watching in the audience to submit questions for our presenters. You can use the Q&A function in Zoom. We'll be collecting those, and we'll have a short moderated conversation between all of the presenters at the end of the program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to BlueBlock Reef Garden. Gita and Elliott, over to you.
Great, thank you so much. And I will go into presentation mode. Thanks. So we're here to present the project called BlueBlock Reef Garden. And it is a biophilic reef garden that is a vision for the future. And so here, our vision is about how we can create and occupy our blue waters in a way that allows us to be incredibly biobeneficial all the way from the seafloor to the sky, and understanding how we can create new modes of dealing with phytoremediation and creating spaces that give back to our blue marine seas and not just occupying them. So the idea behind the Blue Reef Garden is really one that looks at a variety of different integrated systems. The idea is that we are creating full closed looped worlds that interconnect both potential for growing new types of ecological systems, cleaning the waters, and in addition, creating spaces and places for humans to interact with our marine life. And so the idea behind the Blue Reef Garden has several components to it, and allows for this concrete floating hull that is the base for it. And this concrete floating hull actually has a fairly long history. It comes out of a Dutch typology, and actually a typology, fortunately or unfortunately, in the military world, where they were creating floating concrete hulls for landing airplanes in World War II. And these concrete hulls can have great buoyancy and can actually be occupied with the interiors. But our idea behind the concrete hull was to not just create a typical concrete hull that just occupies the water, but also is biobeneficial. And so understanding how the skin of the concrete hull can be fabricated in a way that can create habitat was a really important aspect of the project. And then the idea was that it would become a floating foundation for a variety of different uses. One of them being a type of greenhouse that can harvest and filter a water system that then allows for marine plant ecology to be grown within. And so that way it can also provide a space and a place for humans to understand how we can create and grow more plant life. And part of that greenhouse was to also have solar integrated panels with it, and also to have a shade structure, so that way when humans are occupying the platform, they're able to get some relief from the sun and the sea. And so it is really deeply connected to the underwater. And I'm going to turn it over to Elliott to talk about how we envisioned for the future the plant life to get integrated with the project.
Great. And I'll talk more about this as well. But the idea, I think a big thing, I'm noting that Gita and I have been involved with urban agriculture for a really long time, is to think about kind of the multiplicity of benefits that plants provide. Of course, they are the engines of all of our ecosystems. That's a key thing. They adapt in these phenomenal ways to highly challenging conditions, particularly plants that are halophytic, meaning that they're okay with salt. And so that the idea is to really highlight those, to explain those, again, kind of reinforcing the educational opportunities that this reef platform provides, and then thinking about food. How do these maybe sometimes unusual plants also become things that are part of our new diet? How do we expand the way that we think about our relationship with the ocean? Maybe not one as, certainly not extractive, but as kind of collaborative with the plants as well. You want to pop through a few more of those plants? There are some that are, I think, pickleweeds on there. Sorry, my font is really small right now. Some that are like actually really almost occupy conditions that are uninhabitable for anything else, the pickleweed in particular. The kale, again, something that's ornamental and food. So thinking about these as potential kind of narrative drivers, also ways of telling stories to this broader public that the reef invites into the process.
And so we worked really closely with a local climate adaptation organization called the Ready Center. And the Ready Center is located here in Gowanus Bay. And the thing that we love about this project is that it was both really crazy forward future thinking. We haven't quite built this project yet. And it was very rooted in this idea of testing and understanding how what's actually happening in real life, in the water, with marine scientists, with local people. How do we actually create a bridge between that to create this vision for the future? And so Ready Center occupies a field station barge here in Gowanus Bay, where all of our testing and piloting took place. And it is a bay that represents really sort of the typical industrial world of New York City, with 520 miles of riprap coastline and edge condition, polluted waters. It has a CSO. And at the same time, we have access to 4.5 acres of water here. And so understanding how we can build and occupy this place to sort of make a better world. And so, as I said, like this riprap edge is really a big condition. And the project lives at this sort of like interstitial space between what the current condition is and what the future is. And so this idea of the reef garden was to really help us and New Yorkers and policy people think about how we can transform this edge into something that is much more productive and better habitat, like sort of the historic salt marshes that Elliott's going to talk a lot more about in a second. And so this project is what we call the slice of tomato or the slice of lettuce within a much larger project. And we have been designing also another project called the BlueBlock Gardens, which have successfully launched. We have 15 of these in the water, and they're now being located at other bays. And the BlueBlock Gardens are really a smaller version that focus on a single typology of marsh grasses that float out in the waterways. And the vision, though, is to eventually get to a much larger project, which is this climate lab, which is also floating on a biophilic foundation that then is a place and space for much larger systems to occupy. So we are sort of in this middle zone from the floating garden to the BlueBlock Reef Garden, which is sort of a scaled element of that, which acts as both a filtration and a greater habitat, to then this larger hull, right? And understanding like how can we go through from scaling up from the very small to the very large, creating this proof of concept. And so we are occupying this like where the dashed orange line is, this transitional zone, trying to get from one small design to another much larger design aspect. And so we've been really thinking about how do we move from like sort of that wooden structure to something that's much more durable, creating floating concrete, what that means, how do we get concrete to float, what's that mixture, in addition to concrete not being a really great sustainable material because it's such a high, such a high carbon footprint. So much of the work that we've been doing is in relationship to the Ready Center and the Ready Center staff and volunteers. And so this is project that we're here talking about represents a much wider group. We're here sort of representing a huge team that have been incredibly diverse and rich with information and have a great variety of expertise, from scientists to fabricators to NOAA experts in terms of the water quality. And we've really considered this to be like a lab type of project, where we have taken the idea of the floating reef and the floating reef garden and distilled it into a couple of different elements. And that those elements being like the material aspect, like how do we actually look at biophilic concrete and the formula and the texture to create it? How do we look at the marine aquaculture opportunities and environments, the plant opportunities that this can afford? And then how do we look at it from a fabrication process? Ready Center is all about providing workforce training and job opportunity and experiences for anybody to come down to the water and participate in climate adaptation. And then eventually, how does that change and sort of go into a much more formal language? So, you know, we really started with this idea of community collaboration, right? And getting people's hands dirty. Students and kids actually started creating biophilic concrete forms and shapes, working with Ready staff and educators. We hosted a whole lot of events and moments for groups to gather on the barge and really understand the ideas that we were working through. You know, kids are collecting, the floating gardens are created by this closed loop system of corks. And so as these events happened, we were always talking about what the larger vision was. And we spent a lot of time also looking at different types of concrete. We partnered with a couple of concrete fabrication firms and a couple of Dutch companies that came over, threw these into the water, which had various different textures. And then we would pull them out of the water and look and see it, how like the marine life was gathering on them, documenting that through photography. The Ready Center team was also testing out kelp-crete and understanding how we can lower the carbon footprint by integrating kelp that they harvested on site, and then understanding how we can texturize the concrete as well. And so Elliott did a lot of research around plants and is going to dive into the plant side of it.
I'll try to be a little bit, because we have about 5 minutes left, but I could talk about salt marsh ecosystems all day, and maybe we can talk about them more at the end, just to contextualize sort of like, why are we doing this? What's the intent here? How is this referencing the past in some ways, but ultimately also how is it looking to the future? We have now about 4,000 acres of tidal wetlands left, for instance, in Jamaica Bay, but have lost 80% of those. So 4,000 is what's left, but we had much more, let's say, since the 1800s, the 1600s. 1800s is when we start to lose them. We can see here in the bottom right is the extent of historic wetlands in New York City, with a little inset map showing us what Gowanus looked like and the Gowanus Bay looked like, where the Ready Center is currently, prior to wetland infill, prior to the kind of excavation for the canal. And I just want to say, like, while there is actually totally space for traditional restoration, I think what we're looking at is how do we reintroduce the benefits? Like, what are the things that we love about wetlands? How are those things working in a kind of functional way? And how can we reproduce that function? Again, with also thinking through the educational aspects. And really, as Gita noted, we're working within an industrial edge. So how does a hardened edge accommodate without kind of a radical transformation, a kind of more incremental set of changes. All right, I'm going to skip a little stuff here. One of the kind of major players, the kind of superhero of wetlands, is the Spartina alterniflora. One of the things that we're looking at shifting from what the work we've done thus far is trying to increase kind of complexity. Spartina does amazing things. It is literally the workhorse. It's the foundation of all of our marsh ecosystems. It is essentially a monoculture. It's the only thing that worked in our original BlueBlock gardens. You can see up here on the top was sort of like some of our early iterations of BlueBlock gardens had these kind of bag conditions. We thought we needed soil. Turns out because of the contamination from CSOs, there's plenty of nutrients in the water for our little grasses. And that these do, even at a small size, even with a singular species, they provide really critical habitat in addition to all the other amazing things that wetlands do. So there are a couple of examples of floating wetlands in the meadowlands right now, and they've found that they're excellent spots for breeding birds. They're away from mammals that eat eggs and things like that. All right, 2 minutes. I'm going to be really quick just to say that so this kind of shift towards a kind of greater ecosystem, looking at increasing kind of the area of plant ecosystems that we're introducing to the reef garden, these sort of upland areas, and noting that we've developed, again, this kind of laboratory approach to sort of pilot testing. This is an early, what we called an outrigger prototype on the bottom here, where we were trying to create two different, in addition to the fully inundated zone, two additional zones for planting, one out of water and one that was getting kind of intermittent wet, so more like a kind of occasional tidal periodic inundation. And then I'll just, kind of reiterate what I was saying before about the value of using edible plants and sort of the kind of narrative potential for that. All right.
And so back to this lab idea. So part of it is this closed loop lab, and how do we also integrate people with it? So Ready Center has done an amazing job thinking about that closed loop. And one of the aspects of the textured concrete hull, which was the sort of foundation of the project, is adding in kelp. And so the team is one of the first teams to be putting kelp into the water, harvesting it. They've grown pounds and pounds and pounds of this, and mostly through volunteer activism. And now it's also going through NOAA testing, and it is bioaccumulating. So it is bringing up toxins. And so that's something we also have to figure out and address in understanding how the reef itself is going to interact with the kelp farming, because for us, it's really important that it be fully integrated systems. And so the kelp was then dried and then crushed and then added into the concrete to test out. And then we've been really thinking about how the texture of the concrete will also create biohabitats, different types of stamping, different types of extrusions. And I'm going to end on this note of a really wonderful very sort of joyous moment of integration. I actually attended the first set of presentations and found Richard and Dukes from Pratt Institute, where also Elliott and I are teaching, and they presented their project on these types of concrete structures that I was really inspired by, and we're now in conversation to understand how we might be able to do some of the reef garden and garden casting or concrete casting with their studio and through their methodologies, because it's a low volume, minimal material that has a greater potential for flotation. And so this is Richard having created a formwork that then we're hoping to cast in the next month or two. And so it's a really nice way to have integrated our project and our learning process and experience with previous grant winners, and really understand how lots of these worlds are overlapping. And we just thank the ARC League and NYSCA for the opportunity to be able to take this exploration to the next level. And really now we're sort of getting back into understanding how the forms will be transformed and sort of taken to the next design iteration. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Thank you both. That was really fascinating. Obviously, the scope and ambition of this project is vast, and so the amount of time doesn't really do justice to that. But we're going to be shifting gears now to a very different kind of project, the Harnessing Sound from Knit Textiles project. So I'm going to invite Melissa on screen. We already have one great audience question. These are very different projects, or are they? Maybe that's something we can discuss a little bit, so keep those questions coming. Melissa, over to you.
Thank you. All right, let me share my screen. And okay, good. So harnessing sound from Knit Textiles. This is a project that Anthony and I started before applying for this grant. We had sort of discovered that this was something that we could do through working through a grant with the Cornell Council for the Arts. And what we wanted to do moving forward was to it's a really kind of exciting, novel, interesting thing to do with knit textiles, create sound, and I'll show you an example to start so you have an idea of what we're doing. But we were really curious about, one of the questions on the grant was, who's this for? And I decided that it's for creatives, it's for other artists. If we put this out there, one thing about being a textile designer is that you are creating something that always has an end use beyond what it is. So fabric's always used for different things. And so I think that's the way textile designers often think. We're thinking about the potential of what something could be used for. And so this was a really fun idea for an end use. So let me go ahead and play this example. This piece of fabric is connected to, we're in Anthony's recording studio, and it's sort of connected to one of his synthesizers via a MIDI controller hub. And you can see that there's a general sound, but that sound becomes modulated and changed depending on how you distress the fabric. Oops, it's harder to, okay, here, there's the next one. So I want to talk a little bit just about the nature of knit fabric and why I think it's actually a great conduit for this end use. It's basically made out of interlocking loops, right? And here's a illustration of that. Here's just a little video showing how it works, right? You knit in rows, and each one of these little loops is a knit stitch, but it's a continuous thread. You can take one thread, cast on, and just continue knitting back and forth. And when we use a specific type of conductive yarn, that a voltage will run through it. It will run through the whole thing because of the way knit fabrics are made, and respond as that current is running through. So if we look at just, this is the one knit stitch. This is like, I guess if we're talking in architectural terms, this would be your brick, right? This is your building block to a knit fabric. But unlike bricks, it's very, which are very dependable and stable. Knit stitches are are unstable, and they can respond in ways that can often be surprising, which is something that frustrates a lot of people about knitting, but also is something that gives it a lot of its characteristics that are desirable. And one of the big ones is that it stretches. So let's just watch it stretch, right? So in the width direction, it will stretch a lot more than in the lengthwise direction, right? So I kind of like this when I show it again. It almost looks like a knit stitch dancing. So when the loops are all facing in one direction and they're all next to each other, another attribute to knitting, which also gives it its stretch, is the fact that it curls. It's an unstable structure. Taking any material and kind of bending it like that is something a lot of materials don't really want to do. So if there's any hand knitters out there or any knitters who knit on machines, you know what I'm talking about when you use jersey and it curls. Even if you've have a t-shirt that gets cut and it curls back, that's because of the unbalanced nature of knitting. So here's an example from a swatch of mine of the jersey roll. And this is just to show, for contrast, a woven fabric, which is inherently balanced, which lies flat, which is very stable structure inherently, as opposed to knitting. So I think that it's the stretch and unbalanced nature of knit fabrics is what makes it the right textile for harnessing sound. This and the fact that it can be knit with one continuous thread. Another interesting thing that's come up as we've worked on this, as we've connected different sound patches, is the fact that different structures respond differently. Here's a recent piece. So one of the more interesting things is the fact that that sound at the end, it sounds like rushing water to me. And it's interesting how the way that you distress the fabric changes the sound. And it's always really exciting to me when all of a sudden the sound doesn't just sort of modulate the general sound patch you hear and to hear different pitches, but all of a sudden this whole new sound comes in. And I think that often happens when the synth is becoming overwhelmed in an interesting way. So here's basically like the workflow of what we've been doing. You know, you start with the conductive textile. You have this hub of a MIDI controller that goes into a digital audio workstation. The one we've been using is Ableton software. And then so these initial videos from Anthony's recording studio, it then goes into a polyphonic synthesizer and powered speakers. And so you get a really, really nice quality of sound from that workflow. But you can still get this to work just through the first row for the first 3 steps, just directly into a Ableton software, because that's acts as a synthesizer itself. And with Mie, we've been exploring using even apps on the phone and connecting it to a Bluetooth speaker. And we've gotten some really interesting, good results from that as well. All right, so we're going to look again at the stretching properties of knit fabric. Right. So I had this hypothesis that, oh, well, if we stretch it out, then all of a sudden those loops are creating less resistance for the current to go through. This is from somebody who doesn't know a lot about electrical engineering. So, but it turned out that doing that was interesting because it just shifted the way the current was running through. But it also slowed down the changes, which was interesting in the horizontal direction, the more stretchy direction. And part of it, I think, may have to do with the fact that it, when you spread it out, it took longer for it to actually get those individual fibers to start stretching out. It turns out stretching it in the vertical direction responded more quickly. And these are still hypotheses. We want to continue doing more work to really test these swatches and figure out, really get closer to figuring out what's going on, so we can have a little bit more control. So I think it may be at this point compression of the fibers that helps, but not sure. So here's an example of another swatch being stretched in both directions. You see how it took longer for it to respond, but it does. Okay, here we are. So one of the things that I was really interested in doing with this grant as well is, since we figured out there's this thing, a way to modulate sound with knit textiles, I want to see if other artists would be interested in using it, and if we showed it to them, what would they do with it? Where would they take it? Mie has been one of those artists that I've worked with a lot, and it's been really interesting to see what she's done with some of the garments I've made. And a couple of other artists include Daniel Preston here. I also want to say that the artists I'm working with, even though I work at Cornell as a senior lecturer, I love my job, but I sought out, partly because this was an independent projects grant, it wasn't really for curriculum. I sought out Ithaca artists in the community rather than looking for colleagues at Cornell. And I'm really glad I did that. It just creates, it's just such a different type of relationship and way of working together with somebody. And it's been really interesting. And I'm also lucky to be in a community where there's so many interesting creative people. So Daniel is a musician, but he's also someone who likes to make his own instruments. And so this sort of was a good fit for him when I showed him what we could do with the swatch using a MIDI controller. He just ignored that process and created his own, which was not a MIDI process, but he used control voltage, which is, the original Moog synthesizers used control voltage to modulate sound. And so Daniel made a few, hooked up my swatches to several instruments that he'd been tinkering with. One of them being this Casio keyboard. I think he rewired it to connect to one of my swatches, and the swatch ends up working somewhat like a wah-wah pedal. And so I'm going to play this video real quick so you can see. There's two parts. It's a 1983 Casio keyboard that he'll play a note, and Eileen, another musician I've been working with, will stretch the fabric and it'll change the pitch of the note. And then he also has like a samba beat that's built into the keyboard, and when she stretches it, the pitch, the octave of the samba beat will go down. And it's interesting because it always sounded to me like it was slowing down, but it was actually just dropping an octave. So I'll go ahead and play this for you. Okay, and this is another instrument of Dan's, which is, I think, I love this instrument. It's a mic he made using a landline phone receiver and a tin can from his recycling bin. And Eileen will sing into the can, and it already has a distorted sound, but it will distort it further when she uses this swatch. Okay. So, and then for Mie, I've been working a lot on developing garments for her to wear. It's just, I've found that the designing for a dancer is just the perfect match for this. Often I think Dan and Eileen are musicians that, the way that they work, this worked really well for them. I've also run into a lot of other musicians who have a hard time with the lack of control. But for dance, it gives you this sort of freedom of just creating the sound yourself, listening to the sound, responding to the sound of your garment, and then making a new sound. It's like you're in conversation with the garment as you dance. Here are some pictures of Mie using one of the garments, or I guess you could call it a costume, right? If it's for dance. And here's a short video from that same moment. All right, so what happens when we bring Mie and Dan and Eileen together? Then some really interesting things happen, because we have Mie connected to the MIDI controller and synth. And once we discovered that she could connect her controller to an app on her phone, she was able to take the dress home with her and practice and really explore what could be done with it. And we'd meet in my studio, and I'd get some ideas just from the movements that she was making, what could make a more interesting dress, but also a more responsive dress. And this is like something I'm still sort of have ideas on and exploring. And then we also would meet with Dan and Eileen, and they would connect using alligator clips Mie's dress to their instruments. And so it would become like a jam session. And this is what we did most recently. So we sort of had our debut at the Arnott Art Museum, where I have an exhibit, and for the closing, we did this presentation and performance all together, and I'll show you a video clip of that. This red dress, we have 2 layers now, is the one that the strip along the bottom is connected to Dan and Eileen's instruments. She's dancing. And so I have still one more artist I'd like to work with, or I'm planning to work with, and we're just getting started. And that's Anna Warfield, who's multidisciplinary artist, and she creates soft sculptures, and we're talking about a soft book that speaks to you as you turn the pages. It's been interesting because so for Anna, it'll be, you know, she'll be the artist designing the piece, and I'll just be more like the engineer figuring out how to help her get the sound to come out of it. With Mie, she's the artist creating these incredible movements and these sounds, and I'm trying to give her a tool to do that. And then with Daniel, it's been an interesting, you know, collaboration as well, because he's created something that I figured out a technology for, and then moved it into a whole new technology that suits the approach that he has to music. And so I just want to thank the Architectural League and NYSCA for this opportunity, because it's just been really rewarding and enriching, but there's also so many more things to explore and figure out with this sort of direction that we're going in. So thank you, and I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Melissa. That is the process is so interesting. And I think Zoom loves to keep us wanting more because of how compressed the audio sounds over the internet. But I know that we had an audience question about getting some direct links to those videos. So maybe if people who are watching want to reach out to us, we can share those, or maybe even cut one into the final recording of this, which will be posted on our website. But yeah, just I'll invite everybody, all of our presenters back, and I'm also going to introduce my colleague from the League, Anne Rieselbach, who's the League's program director, who's going to be sort of supporting the kind of discussion. We've got a few minutes for conversation. So those were super interesting and incredibly different projects, which is what I kind of like about this pairing, because I think it shows better than we really could have ever hoped how the breadth of stuff that the grant can support and the kinds of things that it makes possible. So I actually, my first question was going to be about, or it was 2 related questions. It's going to be about both scale and about process. Process is really important, I think, to any grant that gets support through this program. But for both of these projects, I think what really strikes me is the scale, working from the really small in particular to like potentially really vast ambitions. I was thinking about that watching the kind of the first 2 slides that you showed, Melissa, of the sequence of the knit, which to me is really interesting because it has a kind of like audio waveform geometry to it that is also just a very interesting kind of kismet. But thinking about building from that to a costume that a dancer might wear, to an entire performance of those costumes, And I was thinking about that similarly with Gita and Elliott, your slide about working with concrete contractors to identify like what's the perfect texture for this concrete to support like a marine vegetation. I was wondering if you could each, maybe starting with BlueBlocks and then harnessing sound, just talk a little bit about how you think about scale with your projects and like how big you think they could get or how scalable you think they can get and what your ambitions are with that.
Yeah, it's I think sometimes it's hard, but at the same time, you almost feel like you can't move forward until you get to the smaller scale. So, and really always thinking about how the small scale connects to the larger scale. And Elliott can talk about this as a landscape designer, right? Like we're looking at large landscapes all the way down to the plant. And it's the same way. And I think for us, it's always like this iterative process, which is why we almost like leapt forward, 20 years and really thought about what it looks like in the future, and then backed up and then understood the components of how we need to get to that vision, and then sort of dissected it into those smaller components. And then now we're looking at it like, oh, what's the marine life? How is that going to integrate with this? What are the habitats? How does the concrete work? How does literally humans, right? And how do we deal with community integrated with this? And so breaking it up into its smaller components. And I feel like part of this particular project allowed us to do that. And now for us, it's putting those components back together again and understanding how the change is in the form, right? And then what the next iteration is that comes out of that. So, that's like this iterative closed loop cycle, almost like we're thinking about the systems. And Elliott, maybe you want to talk about sort of the plant world that we've been considering in that vein.
Well, I wanted to say that I really loved the knitting stuff as a knitter, and just thinking about knitting in a whole new way just like kind of blew my mind. So I just need to put that out there. Thank you. And I just having also worked in the kind of intersection between dance and design and art, like I'm also like, how can we bring these together? I'm very excited. I don't know. So that's what I'm going to put. Actually, I'm going to defer in time-wise. I'll come back and talk about plants more, but I'm excited to hear what Melissa has to say. So I'll pass my time to her.
Yeah, so there's so many questions I have on the small scale, because I feel like it's the small scale that's going to sort of clarify how this is working. And I saw a question from one of my colleagues, Larissa, which I hope we can talk later because you might have some insight for me about, with some guesses as to what's happening with the knit structure. But I love to play on the small scale, and in particularly with something like this, because it's just, you sort of imagine the currents running through and there's something happening there on that scale, which is being projected out through sound. Then, in terms of the larger scale, yeah, I feel like there's so much potential, but so much potential also in terms of performance. And there's the costumes for the dance, which I think is like probably going to be the most directly easy thing to do. But there's also ideas with like curtains and other things that you could have like in a performance space, and sort of blow it up larger than that. So
yeah, I saw that question from your colleague about, speaking of scale, I mean, we're really getting down to fundamentals, and we're talking about electrons passing between the different strands of the textile. I'm curious also, since we have you, Mie, I would love to hear from you a little bit about your role, what it was like to participate in this and what it was like to actually sort of embody this in the performance that we saw a little glimpse of in the video.
It blew my mind. Like, I've seen a lot as a dancer and I've never seen this. And I was telling Melissa, it was weird because before I even met her, as a dancer, I'm so used to moving from music. And I was thinking, what would my body sound like instead of what does my movement look like to music? What would my body sound like? And I was like, just don't know. And then I met Melissa, and it was just crazy. And it was a really great collaboration because I felt like we were scientists, you know, like I might have a problem, and then with her knowledge, she would know what to do. And so we really complemented each other in that way. And so I don't know how many versions of the dress that we had, but it was like I felt like she was giving me a new toy every time. So it was extremely satisfying as a dancer just to be able to have a movement make a sound, because so often it's totally dictated by an external sound. And I was telling her a little bit about the feedback loop. Not only would my movement make a sound, but then I could dance to the sound I made, which would create another sound, which would create another movement. So it felt, whenever I would rehearse on my own, really meditative. And then bringing Dan and Eileen in, I just, like, the first time we did that, I was so over the moon. I felt like I was in a band. Like, I got to be in a band, but my body was the instrument, you know? So I just think this could go so far. It's sort of mind-boggling, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I think what my experience of watching the videos is how psychedelic they can be. I think it's both the what you're actually hearing and just the notion of how it's being created in a very just in a very embodied way gives, I think, anybody watching a very different experience of that movement. There is another good question here. I think, Melissa, you touched on this already a little bit, just mentioning kind of set pieces during a performance or a concert. We had a question about, for example, using a knit swatch on a playground. So like another use case for like a manipulated knit swatch to create these sounds and that interactive experience. Have you thought at all about other uses?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've seen some, I wish I could remember some names of some of the people, but I've seen, architects and fiber artists explore knits in that setting of the playground, and made some interesting things. And then in terms of, I feel like that could be the one thing about knit, like I almost like crochet is better for a playground. Like it'd be worth to explore, because crochet doesn't, because that stretch thing means like it's sort of, it loses its shape eventually, like staying taut and tight for something to climb on. Could be, so and I'm probably getting too much in the weeds right now, but but I just think that yeah, no pun intended, Gita. So
I was trying to think of some clever way to respond to your weed comment, but other than we are fans of
Well,
weeds.
but
So
as
yeah,
Elliott, you
always
said, like,
always happy to be in the weeds.
I love this idea of thinking about like how knitted structures then also could integrate with marine environments. I'm like, oh, like, and what does it sound like underwater? And so like, it could be really interesting to see, like, because we're doing muscle roping, like there's a lot of sort of marine environments that require this knitted type of structure, right? And sound might be a whole different thing, but I don't know. Like all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, that's kind of a wild thing to consider as well.
This raises a question, something Dan and I were talking about before this, and we've noticed in a lot of architecture practices and design practices, so that kind of intersectionality of different kinds of approaches and forming strategic partnerships, and the sort of silver, or at least pewter lining of COVID has been all of our willingness to try that more readily through different means, because despite the fact we were disconnected, we're sort of overconnected in a lot of ways. How do all of you go about searching for collaborative partners? Because you've each managed to find all sorts of successful ways to expand your research, or think about it even through a different set of eyes or materials through these partnerships.
It's a good question. I feel like, when I was listening to Melissa's work, I kept thinking about how, we're all practicing a very different type of architecture in a way, because we're very much tactile. And, while we sort of like came up with this idea and this vision, for us, like it couldn't go very far until we got into like the tactility of it. And then there's also these other layers of like, well, what's the science behind it? And, you know, we're not a scientist, right? And so in order for you to actually move a project forward, you have to bring on other expertise to, and like I said, we are sitting here today representing, I don't know, 20 people who are involved in the project, right? And so, and you know, it'd be nice to have a stage with 20 people to be able to voice how the process works. But, you know, it's really about that. And that's why projects can be slow, right? Or projects don't move in this, like, it's not linear, and it's not even like this way. It's kind of like this, you know, and there's just lots of different ins and outs and ways that it gets formed. But yeah, I feel like it wouldn't happen if you didn't have that kind of, and I don't know, maybe, yeah. So it's always like searching for the other side of the input.
Yeah, I feel in terms of being able to find people, I feel like I've been really lucky. And one thing is I feel lucky to be here at Cornell. It's a sort of large research university, which so many, you know, just the amount of the brain trust here is pretty amazing. And there's so many people doing interesting things. And also I think that's like people that think in terms of doing weird stuff like this. Do you know what I mean? So, so people are open to that. But also, like I said earlier, even being in this community in Ithaca, which is, you know, relatively small, you know, compared to being in New York City. But in some ways, I personally think maybe I operate better in a small pond. It's easier for me to find, you know, the sort of my, you know, I don't know, the people that I'm looking for within a smaller pool than if I was in New York City. I'd be more too intimidated and not know how, you know what I mean? So I think, to be honest, that might be part of it. Just the community that I'm in has helped with that.
Yeah. BA, do you have anything that you wanted to add to that if you want?
Oddly enough, I used to live in the city, but when I did that, I was more of a sort of just dancing for other people. So when I moved here, I don't even know. It's just like, I don't know how I met people, but it just happened. Like I met a painter I worked with, and then I met this illuminated wearables. I went to high school with him, and I randomly found out he's making laser jackets. And I met Melissa. I actually met Melissa at a time I was like, I didn't want to meet collaborators. I just wanted to meet new, maybe like friends. And then I met her, and she stood up and was announcing who she was looking for. I was like, oh my God, I have to go and talk to her. So it really has been wild for me. Like I haven't searched people out. It just sort of happened in this town.
Yeah. Collaboration is such like a key part of the spirit of the program. And it's always great to see that kind of become so fruitful and like I think that, you know, for both of these projects, the role of design is as kind of like a mediator or a connector of different fields of research and different even personal backgrounds that's kind of bringing together in a kind of alchemical way. I think that that's the whole point. And so it's really cool to be able to like witness that in action in these two projects. I do believe that we have to, Elliott, do you want to add something?
Oh, I wanted to say that I think an opportunity to really invest time in these kind of cross-disciplinary collaborations is really rare. I mentioned that I worked in the dance field and collaborating with dancers, actually in kind of setting up residencies between artists and scientists. And I just like, I do think it's become something that people are more apt to engage in. Maybe there's a kind of a degree of openness and kind of familiarity, but I think it's really rare to be supported in this. So I just want to really acknowledge like how fantastic it is to be, yes, we have an end product in mind or a process in mind, perhaps. Like there is something that's generative and driving us, but I think we're also like having that space and opportunity to be like, oh, maybe this is a funny little dead end, but it merits kind of a little bit of pursuing a little bit in a further direction, or plugging an additional person in. So yeah, I just want to really thank you for that. And I think it's absolutely necessary for, as a generative, creative community, to have places to do that. So
yeah, that's so important. I think that's a great sort of ambassadorship for the whole point of the program, which is it's not really about the success or failure of an idea. It's about the learning process and the experimental process, and that's what is being sought. So for those of you watching who are interested in applying, I'll just, as a final sort of housekeeping note as we move towards the close of the program, I'll say as a reminder, all of that information is available at archleague.org/ipgrants24. The recording of this event will be posted on our website in a couple of weeks, and you can, if you're watching and you want to be notified of that, you can visit archleague.org/newsletter to sign up for our newsletter for notification of that. This was a fantastic conversation. Thank you to all of our presenters for being here today, who are slowly dropping off a video. So Elliott, if you want to drop off too, that's fine. But thank you to everybody for attending. We'll definitely post the recording of the video, and I hope that we'll also be able to share some more of those fascinating videos of the textile process, so that people can get a real sense of what that's all about. With that, we'll wrap up here. Everybody stay tuned for the next event, which we're planning likely in June. May 22nd deadline for 2024 application cycle. Look forward to seeing all of your proposals then. Thank you.